NBA fans and Los Angeles Lakers fans, welcome to the channel here at Utility Sports, where we cover everything you need to know in the NBA. And in today's video, we're focusing on the Los Angeles Lakers with an offseason preview. Out of all the teams to miss the playoffs, I have been waiting to do the Los Angeles Lakers because I feel like they're one of the more intriguing teams this offseason because there's not a lot of flexibility. A lot of these other teams, I can come into these videos and say, well, they've got all of these options. They can do so many different things. The Lakers do have options, but they're not the most attractive and awe-inspiring type of options that they have. They're looking at making some moves that, are going to try and reset this franchise and get back to their winning ways with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. But that's tougher to do than it is to talk about. So I think the Lakers are in a really tough spot right now. Lakers fans, if you are excited for the offseason and you also do enjoy today's content, please leave a like on today's video and also subscribe to the channel for more NBA content. So let's look at the video preview here. What are we going to be covering today for the Los Angeles Lakers? First, we're going to talk about this past year, a year that I think a lot of Lakers fans are going to want to forget and look past. The record, not that good, but there were a few bright spots, I would say. Then there's some key decisions to make. And this Lakers team, there's a bunch of different options that they can go with. Again, they're not awe-inspiring. They're not like the other teams that I've covered so far, where there's like a lot of really great upside to some of these moves. I think the Lakers here, it's just all about trying to find fit and filling this roster with better players than they had this past year, which I know that sounds obvious, but up to this point, Rob Pelinka hasn't done a great job of that, in my opinion. Then you look at the 2022 NBA draft. This will be very, very short segment here for the Lakers this year. Then we'll look at the 2022 NBA free agency. This one's going to be one where we spend a little bit more time because I think free agency is going to be the end-all be-all for the Los Angeles Lakers this year. They need to go in and find good players that fit around LeBron and Anthony Davis. And again, I don't have trust in Rob Pelinka to do that. I'm sure Lakers faithful do not have trust in Rob Pelinka to do that. Just based off of some of his previous moves, it just does not seem like he knows how to get the job done in that regard. But we're going to talk about their cap space and possible moves that I think they could or should make to try and get back to a championship level team. And then we're going to look at next season. Are the Lakers going to be back in the playoffs? Is it another year where their pick is destined for the lottery? Or do I even see them maybe getting back into the finals? We'll talk about that in this video. Anyone who's been here knows that I was really, really low on the Lakers this past season. I thought they were going to be a 7 or 8 seed in the West. Of course, Anthony Davis missing such extended time and LeBron playing less than 58 games clearly does not help that either. But I did talk about injuries as a substantial reason on why that team was not going to be that good and was definitely not a championship contender at the time. So, I think I know a thing or two about the Lakers. I was ahead of everyone. Vegas had them as betting odds favorites to win the finals or at least represent the Western Conference in the NBA Finals at the start of last year, and I was not buying that. So let's go ahead and talk about last year a little bit more. They went 33-49, which obviously sounds abysmal and terrible. One of the worst records for a team LeBron's ever been a part of. And the biggest thing is they went 6-18 after the All-Star break, which if you look at that, that means going into the All-Star break, there were 27-31, which isn't great, but it was respectable, and it would have kept them at least in the play-in. And if they, picked up their play a little bit in the second half of the season, they could have maybe even been an 8 seed outright and had a better shot at making the playoffs through the play-in. So with that 6-18 record, really, really bad. And the scary thing is they ended on 2 straight wins once the season was essentially over. They started resting everyone. You had the Mac McClung, Austin Reeves combination. And they won 2 straight to end the year. So really, when they were trying before the final games of the season, they were 4-18 after the All-Star break. So really, really bad. But there are some bright spots. Malik Monk played very, very well. I think you could say he was the 3rd or 4th best player on this team for most of the season, and is quite frankly a player who took way less to go play for the Lakers than I think he could have gotten on the open market last year. He has another shot at free agency this year. We'll see where he lands. We'll talk about him a little bit later on in this video as well. Then Austin Reeves, really good find for the Lakers. And when I evaluated him coming out of college, I just did not think he was going to work, but he has really developed a lot his rookie season in a lot of areas. His finishing around the hoop is better than I expected it to be, and he's a better passer and shooter than I thought he was going to be as well. He was a high volume player in college. I didn't think he was going to transition well to the NBA. I still don't think he's a perfect fit next to LeBron or Anthony Davis, but what I do think is he's a quality NBA player now at this point and is someone who you could count on being in your rotation long term. And then finally, the bright spot here, the season's over. That's one of the big bright spots for the Los Angeles Lakers. It just felt like a tumultuous season that never ended. And, there was drama here, drama there. Vogel's benching Russell Westbrook toward the end of games. Russell Westbrook's complaining about play time. LeBron's hurt. Anthony Davis is hurt. Lakers fans, you almost just have to be happy that the season's over, because I feel like it drug on for way too long, and it just clearly was not the Lakers' year. So to new beginnings, that's a huge bright spot for this Lakers franchise. So now let's go ahead and talk about the key decisions to make. And this is one of the biggest issues I had with this Lakers team last year was two things. First of all, you have about 8 or 9 or 10 guys on veteran minimum contracts. That's not going to get the job done in the NBA. That is not fruitful. It never works. It will not work. The Lakers needed to make better decisions last year. And the one I'm going to point to is Alex Caruso. The fact that they were unwilling to enter the luxury tax to sign Alex Caruso back, I think destined the Lakers for trouble before they even got going. Because I think a player like Caruso, who's very good defensively, a little bit of a pass on the perimeter, losing a player like him is tough, especially when you're going into a big three type of team where you don't have a lot of flexibility and you don't have a lot of other players you can really bring in that were non-veteran minimum players. Like, look at the average age here. We're looking at 36, 37, 34, 31, 32. And you get a 24-year-old luckily in there who took less than his market value. A 23-year-old who was an undrafted free agent rookie, which, relying on that is tough. And then you also have DJ Augustine, who is 34. So the average age there is very old, including those two young guys. And without those two young guys, you're looking at 7 or 8 players who average age is about 34, 35 years old. That just doesn't work in the NBA. The oldest team to have ever won a championship, their average age was 31.8 years old, if I remember correctly. And the Lakers, with LeBron James in there, Anthony Davis isn't in his mid-20s anymore. He's up into his high 20s. This team was just old, and I think they needed to find more good young players, and that's challenging to do. It's really, really tough. They did a good job on Malik Monk and Austin Reeves, like I talked about, but the rest of this roster was just not sufficient, and all of these guys are headed toward free agency now. So you have a task ahead of you. Can you keep Malik Monk? You don't even have bird rights on him. So if you're going to keep him, you're probably going to have to use your mid-level exception, which does kind of damage your team in a way that we'll talk about as well. Then Austin Reeves, he's probably going to be fine taking a 3-year minimum contract, I would guess, just the fact that he went undrafted. We usually see that. Players like Moses Brown have taken that in the past. Lou Dort took a contract like that. That's kind of the contracts we're looking at here for a player like Austin Reeves in the trajectory to the NBA. But otherwise, these guys should all be gone. Maybe Carmelo Anthony can stay. He played solid, but defensively, Jalen Green said it best when he said, we're hunting him all night long. So for me, Melo, he can play into a role, but if you're playing him 30 minutes a night, that's a problem. I said that last year, and I think going into next year, if you're doing that again, you've got some problems. So now let's go into another key decision to make, and that is centered around Russell Westbrook. And you see I've got him in a New York Knicks jersey here on the graphic. And the question is to trade or not to trade. And Lakers fans, I want to know what you think. Should you guys trade Russell Westbrook or not? Comment below, trade Russ or keep Russ. Let me know which one you would want to see happen with Russell Westbrook. For me, I think trading him is really the only option that I would want to pursue. Not that Russell Westbrook's a bad player. I don't think Russ is a bad player. What I think is Russ and LeBron is a terrible fit. I think those two cannot play together. And part of that is Russell Westbrook's fault because he does not cut without the ball a lot. He doesn't set a lot of pick and roll screens, which I know you might be saying, why do you want your point guard doing that? It's so you can try and get a mismatch for LeBron. So, Russ just doesn't play into what LeBron's going to want to do. And I think there was better ways to build this team out. So I think now they have to try and make a recovery trade, whether that means sending him to a team like the New York Knicks. And in that, you try and get back a combination of guys like Alec Burks, Evan Fournier, and maybe a couple other players in there, a couple other pieces. I talked about them in the Knicks offseason preview as a potential option for the Knicks to get better, because I think Russ would make the Knicks better. But I also think the subtraction of Russ for other role players would make the Lakers better, even though I'm not the biggest fan of guys like Derrick Rose, Alec Burks, Evan Fournier. I don't think that they're great players, but I think the Lakers need consistent quality depth. And I think the Burks, Fournier, and Rose combination, all of those players do fit into at least good depth players. So for me, the Lakers, I think they need to make a move. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Then we'll go on to the NBA draft. And as you can see here in the first line, No NBA draft assets this year. Their first round pick went to the New Orleans Pelicans from the Anthony Davis trade. So Pels fans, I'm sure you're so excited because not only do you have a pick that's probably going to convey to you in the top 10, but you also made the playoffs this year. So I'm sure that they are very happy out there in New Orleans. We have an offseason preview coming for the Pelicans later this week, so stay tuned for that, Pelicans fans. Second round picks are out in the Bonga, Derek Jones, and Mo Wagner trade, where they salary dumped them to Washington to open up space for good old Anthony Davis. So there's no draft assets this year. Maybe they could use future seconds to move back into the draft, or they could put a lot of focus on UDFAs and try and find players like Austin Reeves who can be decent role players in the NBA. And the other thing here is if they just outright want to trade cash, a lot of teams do trade second round picks for cash considerations. So maybe it is possible the Lakers could move back into the draft and try and find players that they want, that they're targeting. I'm not saying they're going to do this. Rob Pelinka, as someone who's a talent evaluator, has done decent at certain points. He drafted Talen Horton-Tucker. I think that's going to be the one that a lot of people look at. And I think THT is a solid player. I know he didn't have the year that everyone was hoping to, but you can partially attribute that to fit as well. I think THT is an intriguing player who, if he's in the right role and system, could probably be a decent player in the NBA. I like his defensive capabilities. Offensively, I think he's got to grow quite a bit yet, but maybe they can find more players in this year's draft by trading back into the draft to find decent contributors for your roster. Then we move into NBA free agency, and they're projected negative $40 million in practical cap space. Of course, that is with Russ's contract on the books. But if you're going to trade Russ, it's probably not going to be to a team with salary cap space. And even doing that doesn't make any sense, because the only thing you would get is open a huge trade exception. And you really don't have any assets to go make a move for a player who has similar type of value and similar type of contract as Russell Westbrook. So moving him to open up the cap space just isn't really a practical way of using it. Lakers are also hovering right around the luxury tax for next season, and that is an important thing. I know people are going to say, oh, it's the Lakers. They make so much money. Why would they not go into the tax? Well, under Jeannie Buss, this Lakers organization has been very reluctant to do so. They tend to not go into the luxury tax, specifically if they don't have to, and they chose not to when they passed on Alex Caruso. They made a decision between THT and Alex Caruso. Clearly, they made the wrong decision, even just choosing between those guys. They should have chosen Caruso, but they should have just chosen both of them. That's really the biggest issue. And Lakers fans, I would understand why you're so mad at this organization and Jeannie Buss specifically, because you spend a lot of your hard-earned money to go to games, to support this team, buy jerseys, etc. And then Jeannie Buss, who is a multi-billionaire, obviously not as rich as some of the other owners in the league, but still someone who has a billion-dollar franchise, multi-billion-dollar franchise. You would hope that they're willing to, spend that extra $9 million a year on Caruso, even if it costs them up to $27 million total, because of luxury tax. It's just not acceptable for the Lakers to not go into the tax, especially when you have an aging LeBron James and an Anthony Davis in the prime of his career. And then it also limits the likelihood of them using their mid-level exception, because if they don't feel like they're a contender, they're not going to enter the luxury tax again. Then we're also, again, looking at that Russ deal. That could change certain things here. If they do move him in a deal for, say, like Evan Fournier, Alec Burks, and Derrick Rose, or any sum of pieces that are not quite the equivalent to his contract value, they could trade his $44 million contract spot for about $37 million. And that would open up enough money for them to use their mid-level exception. So without going into the luxury tax specifically. Outright, the Lakers could use the mid-level exception anyway and enter the tax. But if they trade Russ for some cheaper contracts that don't quite equal his number, they could still go into free agency and use that mid-level exception as a non-taxpayer mid-level. And then here's some potential targets. Veteran minimums. This is where they're going to have to make their money. They're going to have to find good players here. And forward Daniil House is the guy that I want to highlight. He's the best option here. He's in his mid-20s. He came off a pretty good series with the Utah Jazz against the Dallas Mavericks. He's not the best player in the league, okay? This is not a player that's going to absolutely change your franchise, but he's a player I would feel comfortable giving 25 minutes a night to. Specifically, when you consider other options at this point, he's clearly the best option. Then you look at two aging players in Andre Iguodala, Serge Ibaka. Again, I don't love these. Iguodala has been having a lot of issues with injuries, and so has Serge Ibaka. The two of them have missed a ton of time in the last two seasons. And for me, I understand the idea here. You do get good defensive IQ type players who can help your team on that end of the floor. But at the same time, Andre Iguodala is at a point in his career where he's no longer the finals MVP type Andre Iguodala. He is a player who is going to play probably 50 games. He's going to average about 6 points a night, and that's what he's giving you. And Serge Ibaka is probably to a lesser extent of that. Then I like DeLon Wright here, who actually had a pretty decent series for the Atlanta Hawks. I made this presentation a little bit before the Atlanta Hawks series, and I've been waiting to record it. And with DeLon Wright here, I think that, he might have more value than a veteran minimum, but this is where you try and sell him on, hey, come play with LeBron, come to Los Angeles, and you're going to love it here out by the beach here in LA. You're going to try and sell him on location and a role on the team that maybe other teams can't offer because the Lakers are so thin. Then you look at a guy like Trey Burke and Lou Williams, where you find a shot creator off the bench. Now, Trey Burke has played in a very limited role for Dallas this year, so I think he would be open to a bigger role somewhere else. And Lou Williams as well in Atlanta, a smaller role than he's maybe accustomed to. I think even bringing in both of those guys could be helpful to this Lakers team. They need more creators. They need more guys who can shoot off the dribble. And Trey Burke, Lou Williams, both exceptional in that regard. And then Tony Snell, coming from the New Orleans Pelicans, coming off a 50, 40, 90 type of season. Again, very limited volume. It's not that he's an elite shooter or a player that, is going to be an elite fit around LeBron, but I think he's going to play to a role. He's got decent length. And this is a better type of player than Dwight Howard was last year. This is a better type of player you want to put around Anthony Davis and LeBron. This is going to lead to more long-term success. And I think realistically, if you come away with this whole list of veteran minimum players, which is a real possibility, I think it's really realistic that the Lakers could ideally land all of these guys if they really tried to. I think the team would be better than it was this past year, whether you trade Russ or not. And then if you do trade Russ and you reopen up that mid-level exception option, or, if they just want to go into the tax and use it, Malik Monk, keeping him around, I think makes a lot of sense as well. This team, you need more wings, you need more guards, you need more players who can fit around LeBron. And you have to really build into the idea that Anthony Davis is going to play a lot of center. And if you get Serge Ibaka, you can play Ibaka at center with AD at the 4. Those two guys could work together in that regard. But otherwise, you're going to have to try and fit your roster with more shooting, more playmaking, more talent. And I think this is a better group of players than what they brought in this last year. And again, you might look at this list and say, these aren't that good of players. I know that's the problem. That's why I hated the Russell Westbrook trade when they made it. I thought that they could have went with a little bit of a hybrid route where they went out and got a Buddy Hield and they go out and make a few other moves to try and keep some of their depth, but also upgrade in certain areas in terms of getting a really nice shooter. Maybe Buddy Hield's still on the table. You never really know. But if they can try and find ways to improve this roster using these vets minimums, that's going to be really, really essential this year for the Lakers. Then we move into next season, and the goal, you have LeBron James. The goal is to win a championship. The outcome, probably not. I don't think this team is going to win a championship within the next few years. If LeBron's going to want to win another ring, I think it's going to have to happen for another franchise, but he's locked himself into LA. So unless Rob Pelinka, a GM that I am very, very doubtful about, can really maneuver masterfully, I just don't see it happening for the Lakers. We have to see who they hire as a head coach. There's some good options out there. Quinn Snyder's a phenomenal coach if the Jazz do move on from him. But again, Quinn Snyder's never even been to a conference final. So do we think that he can all of a sudden flip that switch and get the Lakers there using a lot of veteran minimum players? I don't really know. I think that this is a really difficult upward climbing task for the Lakers, and the West is pretty good. Teams like the Phoenix Suns, Golden State Warriors, Dallas Mavericks, Utah Jazz, even, I don't think they're going anywhere, even though they might retrofit their team a little bit. I don't think the Nuggets are going anywhere. In fact, they're going to be better. And then you have some of these young upcoming teams like the Wolves, the Rockets, I think are going to try and get better this next season. I think the Thunder are moving upward as well. There's a lot of good teams in the West that I think are either in rebuilding mode and getting better or are just flat out good. So I think the Lakers, they have a lot of tough stuff ahead of them. I haven't even mentioned the Clippers yet, who were above 500 without PG for 50 games this year and without Kawhi for every game this year. So I think the Clippers, that's the model I think the Lakers should have wanted to build around, is you have your two stars and you build with a ton of depth around them, because even in games where PG and Kawhi didn't play, that Clippers team still was able to compete and win games. And I just don't think that was possible this year for the Los Angeles Lakers. And that's a credit to the Clippers, and that's a little bit of a shot at Rob Pelinka. I think he's done a terrible job. I'm going to be honest about it. I usually don't go out and say this, but I think he's done a terrible job as a GM. I know they won a championship, but again, I don't think he's done a good job in his role with the Lakers. Then we move in to our big thank you. Thank you so much, Lakers fans, for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy today's video. I know it's a little bit more gloomy than most of the offseason previews, but I'm trying to keep it a buck with you. Okay, I'm not going to feed you a whole bunch of lies and tell you that I think this team's going to get back and oh my God. No, I just don't see it. I think the Lakers, that's the goal. They want to get back there, but it's a really, really tough challenge to do that. So again, hopefully you did enjoy today's video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And until next time, we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.